people like to gamble, I guess. Hey, this is Travis. Bittensor is 45th place according to market cap on CoinGecko.com. So the big question that everybody's asking is when top 10? When is Bittensor going to end up in the top 10 crypto coins? So to figure out when TAO will be in the top 10 crypto coins, I'm going to look at its market cap, the state of Bittensor, how close we are to full decentralization, the developer's mindset, alpha tokens on other chains, what really pumps the price long term, the upcoming halving, and my interpretation of the current TAO chart. So to do that, let's just look at the market cap here. So 3.7 billion and scroll up to the top 10 here. We're at Tron here is 10th place at 34 billion. So TAO has to do at least a 10x and probably more because all these other coins are going to pump as well in the bull market. Now, I think Bittensor is going to compete with Bitcoin for its #1 slot in the long term. But in this video, I'm going to be very reasonable about what to expect with Bittensor. I'm a huge Bittensor cheerleader. However, I want to be as reasonable and as rational as I can to not set expectations too high for Bittensor right away. So I think the first thing to consider here is that most cryptocurrencies are just a bunch of degens that are looking to take profit in the next bull market and dump on new entrants into the market. They don't believe necessarily in the long-term vision of the coin that they're holding, and they're really just looking for some exit liquidity when their coin pumps. Now, Bittensor has its degens as well, but the philosophy behind Bittensor, I think, is quite a bit different from your average crypto. So Bittensor has a stupidly ambitious goal, which is basically to create a completely permissionless global free market, something that's never been done before. And to do this, you kind of have to understand how markets work at a deeply fundamental level, at a level that most of us just kind of take for granted. So the OpenTensor Foundation is moving towards this goal. And to do this, they need to decentralize their role as stewards of the network and then eventually dissolve the foundation. So they've already decentralized many parts of Bittensor, but I think the final part will be decentralizing the substrate chain. And we might be still maybe a year, 2 years away from that goal. But the OpenTensor Foundation has decentralized a whole bunch of stuff. Just looking at this last year, for instance, Dynamic TAO introduced alpha tokens, which decentralized emission allocation from just validators to a pure free market. So now the value of the commodities that Bittensor produces are not governed by a single person, no longer centralized, or at least centralized in the hands of, there was 12 validators before this change. But now it's everybody. The full market gets to be involved in the valuation of subnets. Now, also recently, the documentation is no longer maintained by the OpenTensor Foundation, but by Latent Holdings. So that's just like another step towards the OpenTensor Foundation dissolving. There's a bunch of other steps. One that comes to mind is the Discord. I think there's a lot of activity on Discord, and maybe that should be more decentralized so that it's not just like one single point where if the owner of the Bittensor Discord was to go rogue or wanted to impose their view on people, they could maybe shift how the Discord works to try to get that. However, right now it's working totally fine, but it's just one of the things in the long term that needs to get decentralized. So if you listen to the Bittensor Guru podcast, you'll get a really good feel for how the OpenTensor Foundation kind of thinks through some of these updates. Now, they're developing things very quickly. However, they're not afraid to slow down when needed to really think deeply and make the correct decision as far as what to do next in the network. So the mindset is kind of like a slow and steady wins the race, but you still kind of want to get there quickly. There's that quote that Konst, the co-founder of Bittensor, posted on Twitter a while ago, where he says that they're trying to build a 1,000-year intelligence federation. Of course, they're going to decentralize before 1,000 years, hopefully within a couple years. But the idea is to set in motion this unstoppable free market that is going to last many generations. So what I'm really trying to relay here is that the Bittensor devs are not prioritizing short-term price increase. They're thinking very long term. So when we ask the question, when will Bittensor be in the top 10? It might not be this cycle because that is not the goal of the OpenTensor Foundation. When we look at the long term, that is the goal, having a very high price, a price that represents the value of the free market, which is not necessarily what you're going to get out of many, many cryptos. A lot of them are like, okay, well, we're going to build something, we're going to make a lot of hype for it, and then we're going to dump it on people. So this one here comes to mind, right? So like very little effort was put into creating this Trump meme coin. And I'm not sure it's a very good long-term investment because I don't really know what they're actually building behind it. Are they building something that's going to last more than a couple of years? So yeah, Bittensor is about double the valuation of the Trump meme coin, which is maybe an indication that Bittensor is a little bit undervalued if it's only double a meme coin that has basically no utility. But then again, if you scroll up here and you look at the top 10 cryptos, we've got Dogecoin. Now, I'm somebody who could be convinced that meme coins have utility. You know, jokes, speaking truth to power through jokes is something that does have value. I think you're still probably going to have meme coins in the top 10 for the next few years. Maybe it'll be like a permanent thing, just that, you know, people like to gamble, I guess. Now, the other thing to highlight here is that Bittensor subnets are now available on Base and Solana. And a lot of people think that that's going to help pump the price of Bittensor. Now, personally, I don't think it'll actually help as much as people are hoping. What's going to happen probably is you're going to have degens from those other cryptos that are, you know, kind of gambling with their coins as they normally do and looking for somebody to dump on. So I don't know if you'll get any like real long-term conviction holders out of those bridges. So to bring up the price of a crypto asset, you need to have really big institutional money, you know, folks like Michael Saylor that invest large amounts with conviction. So like convincing a few thousand degens on another chain to purchase 2 TAO worth of alpha each is not really going to move the price. But maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe there's something special about those ecosystems. I'm certainly not an expert in them. So that said, there are larger investors moving into the Bittensor space. So I want to show you what that looks like. So if you look at an order book on one of these centralized exchanges, so if we look at the price right now, we're at 364. To bump the price up to 370, it would require here about $600,000 to do that just on Binance. So to get the price to 370 across all exchanges is probably going to be a few million, say. But bumping the price, say 100 up to 460 here. So it says we're at 4.2 million here on Binance. So if somebody bought $4.2 million worth of TAO, the price would jump $100. You probably have to put something like 8 figures in across all exchanges for it to maintain that level. Because if you were just to buy TAO on one exchange, there'd be arbitrage to the other exchanges and the price would slowly decrease after your purchase. So when we're talking about institutional players putting their money in, they're talking about millions of dollars, right? Now, it's not a good strategy for an institutional player to go and buy TAO directly off of an exchange and all at once. So often you'll see them do over-the-counter deals, which don't impact the price at all because they find a seller who wants to sell for the market rate, or they're buying slowly over time, dollar cost averaging in. So in order to move the price, you need millions and millions of dollars of investment. But if a large player enters and they want to invest, say, 100 million into the space, well, then you look at these order books and you say, holy crap, there's just not enough liquidity for that. So they better find a lot of over-the-counter deals. Eventually, all those over-the-counter deals will be impossible to find because there's too many people with conviction. When that happens and the buyer still wants to buy, their only option is through a centralized exchange and increasing the price. So the last year of like chop up and down price here, that has been amazing for institutional investors to dollar cost average in. So they've actually been really lucky with this time period, I think. They've had many months to accumulate and the price hasn't shot up yet. So yeah, every couple months I'll go and take a look at these order books and just see how much it would require to pump the price. Maybe there's 4 or 5 exchanges as big as Binance. So in order to get to 500 here, maybe I'd multiply this sum of USDT by 4, 25 million. As I've said in other videos, there's way more than 25 million going into TAO right now, but a lot of it is over-the-counter deals. So as I'm a fan of saying, I think we've been really lucky to be able to acquire TAO in the 3-digit range. We've had over a year to do this. I don't think we're going to be in this range for much longer, maybe a few more months though. And I see that as a really good thing because the longer it stays in this range, the healthier the chart for a big explosive move to the upside. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about here is the halving. So within Bittensor, there's the regular 4-year halvings, same emission schedule as Bitcoin. And then there's the alpha halvings, which are similar, but they happen every 2 years. So that's within Bittensor, the alpha halvings are happening. And then at the core level TAO halvings, they're happening every 4 years. Now, of course, there's a 21 million supply of TAO, and then there's a 21 million total supply for each alpha token as well. So if you go learnbittensor.com and you search for halving, you'll end up at this site here, and it'll give you an estimation as to when the TAO halving will happen. So it looks like later this year. Again, this is an estimate. Now, they're still making some minor tweaks to how emissions work, so I'm not going to go into any specifics. But generally, the way to think about it is that with a TAO halving, the amount that goes into the subnet alpha pools, that is reduced. And then with those alpha halvings every 2 years, the amount that goes to miners is reduced. Now, as I've said in other videos, it's a really good idea to keep an eye on Bitcoin because it gives you a feel for where we are in the bull market. As Bitcoin pumps up and it gets closer and closer to its all-time high, which we don't know what that'll be, might be 150,000, might be 250,000, who knows? Actually, today I believe is an all-time high again for Bitcoin. So what'll happen is that investors will start to take profit on their Bitcoin investment here, and then that profit will start to flow into other coins, eventually cascading down to some of the really low cap coins as well. And so the way to think of it is kind of like a waterfall. So a lot of people are going to take profit with Bitcoin. Some of that is going to flow into the smaller and smaller alts. So this is what I usually like to look at to give me a feel for where we're at in the cycle. The blue lines here, those are changes in the current US administration. So Obama, now Trump, Biden, now back to Trump again. The blue lines are the election days in the US. And then if we zoom in here, the orange lines are Bitcoin halving days. So they were synced up and they've kind of become a little bit unsynced now. So you can see here from the election day until the peak was almost 400 days for the first one. For the second one, it was again, about 400 days almost. The third one was 350 days. And so if we extrapolate and say a year from election day, that would be right here. So we're still a couple months away. So it'd be November 3rd, or I think the election is usually on the 8th, something like that. So early November would be the peak if this pattern continues. Now, of course, none of this is financial advice, but this is how I'm looking at it right now. So I would expect to see Bitcoin do some crazy moves over the next couple months, maybe up to 150 or 250, who knows? So if Bitcoin does have its peak here, let's just say it's going to have it November 3rd. Let's pretend it's not, but let's pretend it does. Then a couple weeks after that is probably when altcoins will peak, and then we'll have a slow bear market. If this cycle continues where the halvings and the elections shortly after, there's a bull market and then a slow bear market. Those bear markets last like 2 years. That's if this continues. Now, some people believe that it's not going to continue, that this is the last cycle that will bring us to crypto Valhalla. But I'm not too sure either way. For myself, I think it's safe enough for me to bet on this cycle, but I'm going to have to reevaluate before next cycle. And that's just because a lot of institutional money is at play right now. There's a lot more institutional traders. They're going to flatten out a lot of the volatility. So yeah, we're going to have to reevaluate after the next few months here if a bull market does indeed play out like many people think it will. And then as always, myself, I'm holding as little as I can in fiat right now. That will start to change when Bitcoin hits 150 or 250K. So I'll just give you my thinking for what I think is going to happen with TAO specifically. So when I first found out about TAO, it was around this area here. It had just broken through all-time highs. I was like, holy crap, like this is decentralized, permissionless, global, free market capitalism on steroids. You know, you can build any commodity out of it, like just amazing stuff, right? My mind was absolutely blown during this period here. I put in a little bit more here near the peak, and now we've like shaken out everybody who doesn't have conviction. And I think that's like one lens that you can use to look at when investing in these markets. So you can see that the price doesn't drop below this 170 anymore. It has some big reactions off of it, which means that it's a pretty strong support. So I don't think we're going to see TAO go below 170 again. I think there's just a lot of institutional interest at that level. But what happened is I started buying in this area and then up here. And now the price is just really trying to shake out everybody who doesn't have conviction. So I think what will happen is that Bitcoin will do its all-time high here. And then all of a sudden, Bitcoin holders are looking to take profit and throw some of that profit into altcoins like TAO. And then the price is going to just go like crazy on TAO. At that point, it'll break through this resistance. Now, I don't know when this will happen. This might be before January. Who knows? It's going to have a nice big peak. And then what'll happen is the same thing that happened to me over here, where the people who don't have conviction and who bought because, AI plus crypto, that's a good investment, right? Or they're just a bunch of crypto bros who don't really know what they're investing in. They're going to get shook out here. So I think there'll probably be like a bear market to flush out a lot of those people who don't have conviction. And then once we've gotten rid of those people who don't have conviction, and TAO is now in the hands of people who have conviction in whatever the next range that we're going to end up in here. Once that happens, again, it'll break through. So money throughout this period, what has happened is it's gone from people who don't have conviction in TAO to people who do have conviction in TAO. Hopefully that makes sense. Like and subscribe if you like this video. So in conclusion, I think TAO may dip its toes into the top 10 this cycle. Remember, that'll probably take at least a 10x, probably more like a 20 or 30x, which is certainly not out of the question. But I don't think it'll stay there very long because the market will need time to flush out the weak hands who don't have conviction in the coin, the hands that don't know what they're holding.